Hi! Mommy, can I have a pony shark? No. Please, I really want a pony shark. Alright, just a reminder that this unit has to do with all about sustainability, and there's what? 4 things to do with sustainability. So what is evolution and ecology, which is the topic of this, going to relate to? Biodiversity, since evolution is the root of biodiversity or diversity. Alrighty then, let's get started. So now we're going to talk about evolution, and when people think of evolution, they think of that image where the dude was turning from monkeys. Scrap that. Alright, don't think about that. Evolution just means change, and I know change is hard. It's okay though, we're going to get through it. Change is a good thing in evolution, and what's actually doing all the changing is the individual, alright? So evolution is individually changing each individual baby squirrel at a time, or individual albatross at a time, or individual cutesy pootootsie frog, whatever it is. And then when many individuals change, it has the power to make itself through the population after many generations. What's a population, you ask? Great question. It's a whole bunch of many individuals in one species. So it's kind of like these little Russian nesting dolls. They fit into each other. So then multiple populations of all the baby squirrels and all the baby whales and all the baby orangutans in the world create a community, so all the living things. And then when you add the living things and the non-living things, you get your ecosystem, and then all of it goes into Big Mama, which is Mother Earth or the biosphere. So let's show it in real life here. Here's an individual caribou. Oh my god, he's so sexy. But then you put a bunch of those little baby caribous together. Oh my god, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. Oh, I'm running out of fingers. That's a lot of caribous. They're all the same species. That's a population. Now we put all those sexy caribou with those super sexy, mexy, little cutesy patootsies, polar bears, and those honky mctonky, mclonky geese, and that's a whole bunch of living things as a community. Now let's add in the non-living parts like the ice and the mountains that you might find in the tundra, and we've got an ecosystem, and all of the ecosystems of the world make a biosphere, or Earth. So what's the major theory of evolution that dominates most of our evolutionary talk? It's the theory of natural selection. You may have heard of it. It's from a guy named Charles Darwin. I like to call him Chuck Darwin when we're hanging out at the bar together. And he wrote this book, wrote it all up in a really big book called Origin of Species. And what does the theory of natural selection propose? It says, you know what, all these little baby individuals, baby caribou individuals, they're all a little different from each other. I know that's crazy to think, but it's true. Some have big hooves, some have small hooves, some have crazy looking hooves, some have like no hooves, whatever it works. They're all a little different. Where do those differences come from? Well, mutations. So when you're born or when you're conceived, different mutations in the DNA occur. Sometimes those mutations do nothing. Sometimes they're actually a good thing, and they'll create like a really good adaptation or something that will help you survive. We call that an adaptation. So let's say you have a mutation that gives you a bigger hoof for a baby caribou. That's a good thing because then they can run away from the wolves and not fall through the snow. But sometimes if you're born with a mutation that could create a problem, like let's say the mutation was now your baby caribou hooves are made of 24 karat gold. While that would look flashy and sexy, it would not help in running away from a wolf, and they basically would just fall apart and die and be eaten. So if you have an adaptation or a good mutation, you're probably going to survive longer, and then you're going to have babies, and then when you have babies, they're going to have your same adaptation. So after many generations, you're going to keep seeing this adaptation show up round after round after round, and eventually it could become part of the population. Harmful mutations, like 24 karat hooves, you're probably going to die before you ever get a chance to reproduce, and that's just sad. Here's a quick example on a real-life situation. Owls, they're so cool looking. I mean, there's definitely a distinct look about owls, and that's due to evolution over very many millions of years over various traits. One of the coolest traits about owls is that they don't make any sound when they fly, which makes them amazing predators. That's why the rodent who's about to be eaten has no idea they're going to be eaten, because the owl above them is making no sound when they fly. And the question is how? And if we look, the answer is that. And you're like, what's that I just circled? That's feathers, duh. And if you look at the feather is really frayed. It's not like coming together at a nice clean edge. And it turns out that probably many millions of years ago, some bird was born with this mutation, and all the other birds laughed at it, like, ha, look at your feathers. And the bird just sat around and like kind of moped around and cried. But it turns out that bird is the one that's laughing all the way to the rodent bank, because They have feathers that make them silent, and that meant they could capture more food, and that means that they were able to survive better and have more babies, and their babies likely had the same feather content. And over many cycles of generations of this, we end up with owls. All right, since we just went over Chuck Darwin's concept of natural selection, where nature is choosing what traits move on to the next generation, we got to mention that there's sometimes, people break the rules here. And actually, who's the best at breaking rules? People, humans, and that would be a good definition for artificial selection. That's when humans are choosing what traits move on to the next generation. So here are some great examples of when humans choose what moves on to the next generation. Dogs. They're so cute. Oh my gosh, I love you. You're so cute. Look at that face. It's so smushy. It's so cute. Bulldogs, amazing. I got 2 of them. I love them. I love them and hug them and squeeze them. They're so, so, so cute. But they are not meant for this world. Sorry, bulldogs. That's because they got such squishy faces, they really can't breathe well. They got such ginormous heads, and those shoulders on them, my God, those are humongous, all right? And it turns out that those things were created that way because humans thought they looked weird and funny. So they're like, hey, let's take a smushy-faced, big-headed dog and make it have sex with this other smushy-faced, big-headed dog. And guess what? They made dogs that were even more smushy-faced. And people were like, that's crazy cute. I'm buying one. And people kept doing this over and over. And the traits are so extreme now, so much so that the dogs' heads and shoulders are so big that they can't actually be given in natural birth. So all bulldogs have to be given in cesarean section, and they have to have surgery, which is not nature selecting the trait, because nature would never select a trait to move on to the next generation when you can't actually give birth to the next generation. Another example of artificial selection is humans doing genetic modification of organisms. We kind of talked about this in class. Glowfish, when you inject the jellyfish DNA into a fish to make them glow. They are cool, no denying it, but not natural. Evil. Well, maybe not evil, but they're cute, but weird, because you have jellyfish DNA combined with fish DNA. You can use it for a little less weird purposes, which is the EnviroPigs situation. That's pigs with bacterial DNA. The DNA helps to reduce the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen that comes out of the pig poop, which is good for the environment. So these are things that humans are choosing and not nature. And the other type of selection that's not in the natural selection realm is sexual selection. Ooh la la, ooh la la. And that is when a trait is being selected not necessarily because it enhances the individual's survival or chances of living longer, but it enhances their chances of having sex or getting a mate. So an example of this would be, look at that big, oh, I didn't get it, ooh. Peacock tail. That tail is ginormous, and that tail is a huge pain in the tuchus to drag around the forests of Asia as you're walking around and trying to be quiet because it's making noise, and then a predator finds you like a tiger and just grabs the tail and then drags you back into your mouth. That is not going to help the male peacock survive. In fact, it might even reduce its lifespan if it didn't have that tail, compared to if it didn't have that tail at all. But what that tail does do is it makes the females go, ooh la la, and the female peacocks are like, hey, that's a big tail. You must be big and strong. I think I'll mate with you. And then he's like, okay. And so in situations where these really crazy traits are developed, then you get, this is sexual selection, where they're selecting to evolve in ways to enhance the ability to mate. The same thing happens with this lizard here. He stands out, he shakes his head, shows off his little red throaty thing. This makes him stand out to predators, and he's likely to be killed as a result, maybe by a predator sooner in life, but it may get him a mate also quicker. So now that we know about that, there's all this evolution going on, one thing that we should emphasize that I think y'all already know is that things evolve together, or they co-evolve, meaning that things don't evolve in isolation of each other, that there's so many other things that they interact with in the environment that as one thing changes, the other thing changes. And there's umpteen million examples of this. The big one is like pollinators and plants, that the hummingbird has evolved its shape and its look and its bill, bite, beak size to fit into flowers. And the flowers have evolved this shape to help attract the hummingbird so that they kind of fit like a puzzle piece. Same thing with snakes and things that are immune to snakes, like immunity and poison. It turns out that this creatures evolved the poison, so the snakes evolved an immunity, and then this evolved a stronger poison, and then this evolved a stronger immunity, and now we have the situation where the newts are incredibly toxic, and that's because they have this back and forth situation. So just again, that things evolve with each other, they co-evolve. So now let's talk about how those relationships work. Ecology is the study of the relationships between organisms to each other and their environment. And there's a lot that you should have already learned. 5 that you probably should already know are parasitism, commensalism, mutualism, predation, and competition. These 2 down here are relationships that don't really last a long time. They're not intimate, so we call them non-symbiotic. But these 3 types of relationships mean the 2 organisms are in a very close, intimate relationship, so we call them symbiotic or symbiosis. So let's first dive into the symbiotic or intimate, ooh la la, relationships. One of them is parasitism, which I think is super cool. It's gross, though, usually, because one organism is usually eating the other one slowly over time. So one's getting a clear benefit, and the other is not. Here's a good example. There's that sea lamprey that we mentioned in the invasive species section of our class, and that is a fish that has no jaw that bores a hole into the trout and then sucks its juices out. Now, the trout will feel this and obviously will not like this. Look at its face. It's just so unhappy about it. But anywho, it won't die immediately. It's a slow, slow decline if it dies at all. So it could really end up in death after a while, but usually not immediate. The second option is commensalism, where one creature gets a benefit and the other one's kind of meh, doesn't really care. So the example here is the good old moo cow, moo, with the cattle egret, which is this little white bird here. The cow, this big fatty cow, is walking through the field and scaring up anything, snakes, frogs, whatever's in the grass. But the cow don't care because it's eating grass. But then the cattle egret's like, hey, what you scaring up there? I'm going to eat it. So it sits there and walks right behind it and grabs all those food items. So the egret's getting a benefit from getting all the food items scared up. The cow's not really getting anything. Mutualism is the third one, where 2 things are in close relationship to each other and they get a benefit. This happens a lot in the natural world. We're going to talk about 2 that are kind of more unusual that you may not know of. Mycorrhizae is one that's super important, especially in the nitrogen cycle, because myco means fungus. And so here is an apple tree without mycorrhizae and with a small root system, and here's an apple tree with mycorrhizae that has a large root system. And the mycorrhizae means that the root system has a relationship with fungus. So the fungus actually grows on the roots and makes the roots bigger. So that means that they grow and absorb more water and nutrients, which then they give to the tree, which the tree then can use as food, and then it creates more food in photosynthesis and gives it back to the fungus. The fungus gets food from the tree gets more stuff absorbed to help it make more food from the fungus. Another one that's kind of unusual is gut mutualism. This means bacteria are living in the stomachs of things. So termites are eating wood. Why, you ask? Because wood sounds like it would be an awful thing to eat, and it kind of is. But they actually provide a house for these bacteria, so there's a good thing for the bacteria. And then the bacteria eat the wood and digest it and give the nutrients to the termites, so they're getting something good in return too. Mutualism. And finally, we're going to end it up with the non-symbiotic interactions. So that's the ones that are not ooh la la, not intimate. So the first one here is predation. And predation is just when something eats something else, kills it outright. So it's not like parasitism where something's living on something or inside something for a long period of time. It's I'm just going to kill you and eat you. So here, the shark kills and eats the seal. They're not having an intimate relationship. It's a sad relationship for the seal, but it's not intimate. Competition is the other one, and that's when things kind of argue or work with each other to try and get the same resources. So there might be a fight, there might be some sort of competition, obviously, for the same resources. Sometimes different species compete over a resource. So here's like a wildebeest or something that's being competed over by hyenas. Laughing hyenas, that's my imitation, and lion. All right, so there are 2 different species wanting the same thing. We call that interspecific competition. Inter meaning different. When you drive an interstate highway, the highway like Interstate 35W goes between multiple states. So an interspecies competition has multiple species. Intraspecific competition means within the same species. So that would be like if a lion and a lion are fighting with each other. And ultimately, when things want the same things, it creates territoriality. Things are trying to mark their territory so they don't have to either fight for it or share it. So that's it. So go ahead and answer the questions at the end. I love you, I love you, I love you, I miss you. See you tomorrow.